After that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he came to the very presence of God on Mount Horeb. It was in his emptiness, in his not knowing where to go or what to do, that God came and touched him, put a hand on him, and fed him, and then led him to where he needed to go. Perhaps stories of Thomas Dorsey and the prophet Elijah help us to think about times in our life when it just feels like everything is falling apart, when it just feels like there's nothing left, or when the problems in front of us are so tremendous, so complicated, that we just don't know what to do, we just don't know where to go, we're at a loss, and it just feels like life is coming apart. And it's at those moments that God comes to us, that Jesus comes to us, and invites us to an act of faith, What is faith? Very important word. And we can think about faith in a variety of ways. We can think of it as certainly as trusting God, but kind of using the image of our hymn, of our sermon hymn this morning. Faith is also when we let God take our hand and lead us on. When we don't know where to go, when we don't have the strength to go, to really hand ourselves over to God, to let God take our hand and to lead us on. That's what faith is. And we don't always know where exactly God's going to be taking us, and that's a real faith part. But we trust that God has blessing for us. And so we let God take our hand and to lead us forward. There's another hand story in the Bible, in the Gospels. In all four of the Gospels, there's the story of the disciples sailing across the Sea of Galilee. You heard that just a couple weeks ago in the Gospel lesson. It's just after Jesus feeds the 5,000. And when he gets all done feeding the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, it's the end of the day, and all the disciples get into one of their boats, and they start rowing across the Sea of Galilee to the other side where their homes are. But halfway across, an incredible storm comes up, a big storm comes up, and they're already afraid for their lives from the storm. But then, what scares them even more is they see someone walking towards them on the water. It's Jesus walking towards them, but they're not sure if it's a demon or what it is. They're very frightened, and Jesus sees their fear, and he says to them, "Keep faith, it is I, it's me, you don't need to worry." And then, just in Matthew's Gospel, the other 3 Gospels don't have this detail, but in Matthew's Gospel it says that at that point, as Simon Peter, who was in the boat, saw Jesus walking on the water, Peter said to Jesus, "I'd like to do that too." And it wasn't an act of pride or arrogance. He really was a follower of Christ. He wanted to act with the same power that Christ did. And so Jesus says, "Please come out of the boat and walk towards me." And Peter did. He began walking on the water. But after he had traveled a short distance, all of a sudden he heard the wind howling, and he saw the waves beating underneath his feet. And it said he grew afraid, and he started to sink into the water. And it says at that point, Jesus reached out his hand to Peter, and Peter took his hand, and Jesus raised him up and walked in so that he was standing by his side. And then Jesus says, "Peter, you need more faith. You need more faith. You can follow me, but you need the faith." And in that moment, Peter needed the faith to take Jesus' hand. We are in stormy times in our life, but Jesus is there with a hand towards us always, to give us safety, to feed us. He is the bread of life, because sometimes we just need more strength. Sometimes it's just so overwhelming, we just need more strength. To give us safety, to feed us, and also then to guide us as we follow that hand. These are pretty stormy times right now in our world. I don't know if you're feeling that, but I feel like these are pretty stormy times. I've just been pained these last weeks with outbreaks of violence that we've seen throughout the world, in our own country. Last week, the killing of worshipers at the Sikh temple in Wisconsin, or people of peace, people in the midst of their worship, or preparing for worship, to suddenly have a mad gunman come in and start shooting them is not only painful for them, but makes me begin to think, where is our world at? And then just the week before that, the shootings at the theater in Aurora, Colorado, people watching a fantasy movie, but someone living in their fantasy, once again coming in as a killer. We live in a world where there just seems to be more random acts of violence, but then between the nations, planned acts of violence, as there's civil war and fighting over land and so forth. And so like Elijah, or like any of us in our times of despair, we wonder, where is it going, and how can we even go on, and how do we solve these problems? And then within our country and the world, the huge economic questions that Europe, is it going to survive the current economic questions or not? How are we going to respond to that? There are moments when we sink down in the deserts of our lives with all the questions and we feel empty, we feel tired, and we feel weak, and we feel worn. And it's in those moments, that Jesus again invites us to a very specific act of faith. That is to let God, let Jesus take our hand, to feed us, to strengthen us, but then to lead us on the path that brings us to safety, to peace, to the gift of community. In our worship today, we will have the chance to experience Christ's hand of blessing. Jesus is again talked about in our lessons as the bread of life. And of course, when is it that we have a chance to taste that bread of life here in worship? Well, we do it every Sunday when we come to the table. We come and gather at the table, and we are given a taste of Jesus' presence, given a taste of the life that Jesus brings. A time when we can savor God's goodness, that God does come to us today with hands outstretched and says, hold on to me, receive my strength, receive this bread of life. Hear again the promise that I care for you always, that I'm paying attention to you, that I know what's going on in your lives. Pay attention to the fact that I promise to be with you, to feed you, and to hold you. And then God says, take my hand, and I will lead you to the place where you need to be. I will lead you as families, as individuals. I'll lead you as a nation. I'll lead you as a world. Take my hand, says Jesus, and I will lead you to that life. Because this is the life. This is the life which God has for us. And so today, we know we can hand ourselves over to God, the one who loves us, and who feeds us, and leads us to true life, here and forever. Amen. I'd like to invite Fred Demeen to come forward. Fred, Caitlin Demeen, has been our youth worker for the past year, and we have appreciated that so much. But she is moving to Berkeley. She has plans to attend the Lutheran Seminary in Berkeley and continue her studies there, and we wish you very much God's blessings. But today is her last Sunday with us, and so I wanted to take this moment on behalf of the congregation to thank you for your work. You work with your kids on a weekly basis. You're investing your own heart and your faith in them. It was sort of a wonderful climax to all that when you took 4 of our kids to the wonderful Lutheran Youth Convention in New Orleans, where 35,000 Lutheran youth from around the congregation gathered. But really, we thank you so much, and we wish you God's deepest blessings on your new venture, your new step. We have a card and a gift for you today, but I'd like you to please join me in thanking you.
Going, but it is the next step I need to make. So I appreciate my time